Hello, I'm Ariel.
And I'm Christina de la Rocha. Welcome to Season 3 of Solarpunk Presents,
the podcast introducing you to the people working today to create a future we'd like to live in.
Because
if Solarpunk as a genre of fiction dreams about the just and sustainable world we'd like to live in the future,
Solarpunk as a movement rolls up its sleeves and gets down to the business of bringing it about in the present. Oh my gosh, it's the end of Season 3 already. I can't believe it. Before we dive in, I just want to say two things. The first is check out our new website. Same old address, brand new look, and it is beautiful, and it's so much nicer than it was before, so have a look. Second thing is, please join our Patreon. We could use your support. And on top of that, there's all sorts of stuff going on there. We've got early access to episodes, we've got bonus clips, we've got little dispatches that Ariel and I write, all sorts of fun stuff. So please join in at www.patreon.com/solarpunkpresents and support what we hope is your favorite podcast. And now for the episode. Welcome everyone to the last episode of Season 3 of Solarpunk Presents. Ariel and I are going to talk about something that's been bugging me for a long time. And that is, how do you change the culture? Or I guess I should say that a little bit more accurately. How do you change the norms of the culture that you're living in? And I think this is really important for Solarpunk. Because Solarpunk wants to create a great future for all of us, or that's what we all want to do, all of us who think of ourselves as Solarpunks. And that means Solarpunk as a movement needs to do more than just putter around in the garden. It needs to not so much dive into the culture wars with a battle axe, no matter how much fun or, stress or whatever that can be. But it has to figure out how to change the norms of the culture that we're living in.
That's a really good point, Christina. And I am really looking forward to having this discussion with you, because I want to ask you some things about, what do you mean by culture, and which cultures, and what aspects of it are you hoping to change, or what aspects of it are Solarpunks hoping to change, in your opinion?
Yeah, okay, well, I'm not an expert on what culture is by any means, but I have my opinions. Just like all of us. And I think we're all kind of entitled to our opinions because we all live in a culture and we all have opinions about the culture that we live in. And, culture is really, to me, it's just sort of, the way as a group of people you decide to live, and what you decide is acceptable behavior and what isn't, and what your values are, and what things you despise.
What are the cultural norms, Christina, that we're trying to change as Solarpunks then?
Well, I think we all have our own list, but I think there's a core list of things that I would identify that Solarpunk needs to get people to feel are totally outmoded and barbaric and totally beyond the pale. Like the way we feel now about chopping people's hands off as a punishment for robbery, or about not wearing seatbelts in cars. So I think Solarpunk would like to live in a world where we're horrified at the thought of burning fossil fuels. I mean, can you believe they used to do that in the 20th century? It wants people to be horrified about the brutal treatment of the land and animals in modern industrial farming. It wants people to be horrified by misogyny and discrimination and violence against women and racism, both individual and structural. It wants people to be horrified that there was ever any such thing as homophobia or transphobia and discrimination and violence against LGBTQ people. And is that the most up-to-date list of letters? I'm kind of out of the loop on this one.
It depends what culture you're in.
Of course. Okay. I think Solarpunk would also like to live in the world where we're like, oh, it's so weird that people used to insist upon gender essentialism, the gender binary, and the impossibility of gender fluidity.
Yes.
And wouldn't it be nice to live in a world where everyone was horrified by wealth inequality and overconsumption and so on and so on and so on? So for me, that's kind of Solarpunk's core list. I don't know. I've probably overlooked something. I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add.
I think it's a pretty comprehensive list. My thoughts about that is that, like, this sort of cultural change or these cultural norms are just kind of, what is it that William Gibson said about the future? It's here, but it's unevenly distributed. So I think these cultural
That's
norms are
good.
somehow they're here, but they're unevenly distributed, Like there are definitely pockets of people around the globe where these things are outmoded and barbaric, and there are people in pockets around the globe for whom this is just a daily reality that they have to live with.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
how do we, I mean, and some of these things are quite new. Even in the pockets where the future has arrived, it has arrived relatively recently. And so it's kind of interesting to ask, how did we in some quarters decide that homophobia is horrible and wrong and all of this kind of stuff? Like how did that happen? Because in a lot of places where I've lived, that happened really recently, like within my lifetime. So I think that's interesting. And there's people who study how you change norms. But nobody can really, and they can kind of agree on the general ways that changing norms happens, but nobody's got like the magic formula
Oh,
whereby it works every
it's just
single
like,
time.
we're as easy as just flicking a switch. Sorry to
Well,
interrupt.
yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, it turns out that you can do it in several general ways. You can do it sort of top down through laws and nudges from governments and agencies, such as how now we're all like, oh my God, buckle your seatbelt. I
Mhm.
won't start the car till you buckle your seatbelt. Whereas, I mean, back when I learned to drive, I don't even think it was right when that started, but you didn't even, it was only getting to be the point where cars that were sold had to have seatbelts.
Oh,
Right. So we
interesting.
were still driving an old VW camper van that only had seatbelts in the front seats and they were totally useless. I can remember being in driver's ed. So we actually had driver's ed at school in high school for like a semester. And they showed us all sorts of horror movies about what happens when you drive badly. If they don't
Uh-huh.
do that in Canada.
Oh no, they do. They do.
Okay, I mean, then there's always the like, oh yeah, someone fainted and at the sight of this movie, which I think never actually happened. It was just rumor. But there was one clip that I remember. There were two clips I remember in particular. One of them pertained to wearing seatbelts, and it was just this advertisement for wearing your seatbelt that just was this shot, a camera following this pumpkin as it's flying through the air. And it's
Huh.
talking about how, people are like, oh, I don't want to wear my seatbelt because I'd rather be thrown from the car and blah, 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 blah. I don't want to get stuck in a burning car or whatever. And then at the end, it shows the pumpkin, of course, splattering on the pavement, like your head and the brains going everywhere.
When I was in my car accident, my seatbelt actually broke my collarbone. But you know what? I would rather have had a broken collarbone than a broken face and a broken head. The force that broke my collarbone was the force that was flinging me forward and would have sent me through the windshield. A broken collarbone is, like, yeah, it hurts, but it's something that, you eventually, like, it eventually can heal.
It is the most commonly broken bone in the human body.
I am very glad that, it wasn't my face that was broken. And so, that's a cultural norm that,
Oh my God, sorry. I'm sorry I'm laughing, but there's this one American TV show, kind of reality TV show that it must play very late at night on US television. I don't know, but it plays over here in Germany. And, weeknights, there ain't nothing on that's worth watching. And so I often end up watching this. It's called Botched. And it's about these two very arrogant plastic surgeons in Los Angeles somewhere. I don't know, Hollywood, Beverly Hills, someplace like that. And they fix botched plastic surgery things like bad nose jobs, implant, breast and butt implants that have gone wrong and this sort of thing. Oh God, talk about a cultural norm. I mean, it's mostly women who come in with these accidents, these plastic surgery disasters, to quote the dead Kennedys there. And you just think, what is it about our culture that has women willing to shell out tens of thousands of dollars doing such violence to their bodies? I mean, I studied biology, but I cannot watch these operations that they show, because you're like,
Mm.
it's oh, that must hurt. It really, yeah. So this is a cultural norm that totally blows my mind.
Yeah, the whole line, pain is beauty or beauty is pain, that sort of thing. From a feminist analysis, it's because these women are so desperate to fit into a certain cultural norm because they want to attain fitting into that cultural norm so that they can be desirable, so that they can, in essence, get a man or be attached to a man, because that is the way that you acquire wealth and some form of stability, actually, nowadays. Not even just wealth, but just some form of economic and financial stability. Because as a woman, you're going to be paid, what is it, 1/3 less than men, or 60 cents to the dollar.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so there's no hope really of attaining any sort of financial stability on your own. So they feel desperate enough to try and force themselves to fit into a cultural norm that sets a standard for how women should look in order to be desirable to men.
It's so crazy because I mean, it's not even true.
No,
Oh,
it's
I mean, it just, all right. So I guess I would have to add this to my list of cultural norms that Solarpunk should obliterate. Probably making elective plastic surgery beyond the pale is probably not on Solarpunk's list. But anyways,
no, I would argue that elective plastic surgery sometimes is very, very affirming for people and their mental health. So I think it would be sort of a case by case basis, but I wouldn't want anybody to feel that they are driven by negative, desperate forces in order to do elective plastic surgery. People want to get plastic surgery, that's fine, but I think it's the reasons behind it that I want to really poke at. If you're feeling like you're not going to be a full human being or treated like a full human being unless you have this plastic surgery, well, I want to change the cultural norm that's making people feel like that. So I see plastic surgery as sort of a one way of coping with the way that society makes us feel.
to drag us back to our list of
Right,
ways
yeah.
of these, sort of general ways you can change cultural norms. That was the top-down one, the nudges from the government that got us from seatbelts to plastic surgery there. There are bottom-up ones. So, for example, recently I was reading in the news how someone did a survey of Swiss people, and they discovered that this Fridays for Future movement, the school kids going on strike on Fridays here in Europe, their actions have actually gotten the people of Switzerland to at least slightly change their behavior for the environmental better. I think another bottom-up one would be AIDS activists getting people to see LGBTQ people as human beings, as opposed to caricatures or child molesters or offenders against God who deserve to die. And seriously, when I was growing up, my parents, liberal progressive people, seriously thought all gay men were child molesters. That's just what they thought. Over the last 40 years, they've come to totally change their views about that. Maybe not so much because of the AIDS activists, but because I think in response to the actions of the AIDS activists, a lot of gay people started coming out of the closet. And so in my mom's case, she was a school teacher, an elementary school teacher, and her principal, whom she totally respected and thought was the greatest guy in the world, turned out to be gay. So she had to reevaluate her prejudice, and she just threw it out. And these are also very powerful bottom-up ways where you can change cultural norms.
Yeah, I think changing the cultural norm to allow people to feel like they can be themselves really helps to change other people's minds, because I think it's that human to human connection. If you know a gay person, you're not going to have all kinds of these sort of like toxic assumptions about how evil they are, because you're like, well, I know my friend Fred, and he is a very good person.
Oh, yeah. Except if that worked so perfectly, then nobody would be afraid to come out to their parents.
Yeah, that's true. There's a weird power dynamic happening there too. That structural hierarchy. I would say this sort of grassroots, I mean, person to person mind changing tends to happen the most between people who are peers. The parent-child relationship is something I think also that needs to be interrogated. Andrewism has a really good video about it, about how, yeah, the parent-child relationship, the parents are there to be teachers for children, but we've imbued it with some sort of like weird hierarchical kind of almost disciplinary
Well,
uh
it's a patriarchy thing, huh?
yeah, so that, children should be seen and not heard.
Yeah,
And
and as long as your feet are under my table, you will finish your dinner.
yeah, this and a lot of strange power moves that parents sort of exercise over their children that don't necessarily need to do that, but people have been trained so much in our culture to think like this is how parents and children relate and this is how they act. And if you're not thinking through that carefully, then it's so easy to replicate those structures of oppression.
Here also, I think, is a place where the norms have changed a lot
Mm-hmm.
over the last century. If I look at the way, my parents were raised versus the way I was raised versus the way people of my generation are raising their children, or people of the generation that has followed us have been raising their children. I mean, it's like every generation, it's like night and day. It's
That's
it's
true.
amazing.
That's
It,
true.
for the better mostly, I think. I mean, no way of raising your children is perfect, but so I was watching, I was on a vacation with a group of people that my other half is involved with as part of a club, and someone had brought their son. He must have been he'd be about 30 or so, and this son had brought his kid along. Kid must have been like a year and a half, maybe 2 years old, and it was so amazing the way this guy interacted with his son. He didn't just say no to his son. He would say, well, we can't do that right now, or that's not a possibility, but what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And he made it clear that there was room for negotiation, and what the kid's feelings actually kind of mattered. And there was room for the kid to say, hey, that's not all right for me. And then it was offered alternatives. And I was thinking, oh my God, that did not happen in my family. And what a different person I would be if I had learned from the get-go that it was okay for me to speak up and say, hey, I'm not comfortable with that. Can we negotiate? Oh my God, my life would have turned out totally differently, you know?
Yeah, and like I think my parents did the best to raise me differently and better than their parents had. Like there was no corporal punishment, or very, very little anyways. And like there was like, oh, it was so long ago I can't really
Oh,
remember
I
too
know,
much.
but there are places where it's against the law to spank your kids now. I mean, wow, cool.
Yeah, yeah. Like I think that's an example of the way that the government can, or governments can participate in helping to nudge cultural change along,
Yeah, but I
like
mean, I really do wonder where this relaxing of, the disciplinarianism of parenting, I wonder where it came from.
I have a couple of family members and friends who are teachers of small children, and I think it has a lot to do with the way that education was really sort of rethought in the 70s, of like how teachers approach young children and how those teachers were, people who had young children themselves, right? And they were influencing their friends.
Christina here, breaking in to pass on a message from Ariel, who wants listeners to know that we're aware that we're talking about the Western educational paradigm and about a family structure and hierarchy according to European settler standards. And as I'm coming to you from Europe, I'd probably actually just call that European standards. Okay, and that's that, and now back to the discussion. But anyway, so that was the top down and the bottom up approaches, but then we have more organic things, I guess, like entertainment. You can change cultural norms quite powerfully with music, movies, books, TV, advertisements, newspapers, magazines, music videos, so on and so on. And then there's also the internet, which may or may not be a subset of entertainment here, so Twitter and Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, blogs, Tumblr, etc., and so forth. So, I mean, can you think of any other or levers that you could use for enacting a change of social norms, or have I hit them all?
I think you hit the main ones. I would say that entertainment and the internet can actually be used by those top-down approaches or by the bottom-up approaches. So
Mm-hmm.
they're less,
So the more a tool.
yeah, they're more a tool. because like if you're thinking of entertainment like music, movies, books, etc., that can be propaganda.
But what if it's not intentional? What if you just got, this music industry executive who's like, we gotta sell albums. And then it's like, let's make some music videos, and then you've got people who are just putting in stuff in music videos because they think it's cool, or because they think it'll stir up controversy, or because they think it'll get people excited and want to buy the music. But so they're not intentionally trying to change the culture, but they're pushing boundaries.
I would say that's definitely from the grassroots sort of in it, just in that it's sort of a product of individual or a small group of people just sort of deciding like this is cool and we want this in the zeitgeist, as opposed to it being a government mandated like, like we are intentionally trying to change this norm, because it is, unintentional and unconscious. It's something that these music video artists or musicians are sort of pulled towards, but not through any kind of dictate or any kind of passion for, like, for example, some nonprofit organization.
Oh yeah, and then there's also like the Me Too movement. And so, stuff that 20 years ago was perfectly fine in some quarters anyways, is now today beyond the pale. And in part, I think because of the Me Too movement, because women finally just got fed up with being treated like dirt. So this is also it has a long ways to go, but at the moment, this is a very profound change, I think, in the cultural norms.
It means a lot to see big sort of celebrities being held accountable for their actions by the people who have been hurt by those actions. It sends a message to other people that you can't get away with this kind of thing anymore.
But so here's a weird thing. I think most people would agree. Let's say domestic violence is wrong, right? I think that's a cultural norm. I think that we all agree upon domestic violence is wrong. And yet it's very pervasive throughout our cultures. So that I don't know what to think about that. I don't know, because I'm not an academic who studies cultural norms. So there's probably a word for this kind of, I don't know if that's deviance or disobedient. I don't know. I don't know what the term for it would be.
Outliers, perhaps.
But they're not outliers when you look at how frequently domestic violence happens.
It's true. It's true. And again, I think it's because that culture is unevenly distributed. So, for example, where I live right now, or not even my city, but just like, say, like the community I'm in, domestic violence is beyond the pale.
And yet it happens. And probably even the people who do it would probably be like, oh yeah, it's terrible. But I don't know, maybe people rationalize these things.
I can relate this back to the environment, actually. Sorry.
Okay.
For a second. There are forms of violence that we don't recognize as violence. There is a concept called slow violence. It was coined by Robert Nixon in a book called Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor. And it's basically arguing that we don't see the violence of, say, setting up a mining facility upstream from a community. However, the fact that the runoff from that mining is poisoning the drinking water of the town, that is violence. It has the same effect as waving a wand over a child and saying, you are going to get cancer, because perhaps that child will get cancer within 20 years because
not waving a wand, actually just feeding it the chemicals that will give it cancer.
Yeah. So that's maybe a better metaphor.
I mean, let's be direct about this.
Yeah, but because that violence is sort of, it's a sneaky sort of violence. It's a violence that we don't see as direct and spectacular and in the moment. It's not like there is a single moment of violence. It's something that's spread out over time. In the same way that environmental violence, a lot of environmental violence is spread out over time. When we talk about the environment, we need to think in this like deep time scale. We need to think about things being spread out over a time that is longer than perhaps we are used to. Just
I don't know if this is a norm thing. I think this is really hard, and I think our brains are really not quite adapted for these kinds of, I guess they're abstractions, but like when you can't see cause and effect actually happening in front of you, or when you drive your car, you get no sense that you're driving global warming. You can't sense the
yeah,
damage you're doing.
yeah. And so that is sort of a violence that we just can't see and we cannot perceive as being violence. And so it's the same thing as,
And it's hard to feel responsible for it, like in the moment. I mean, unless you're, really have a lot of anxiety about it.
just bringing it back to sort of interpersonal violence, the sort of violence of, say, punching someone. Yeah, we read that as violence, as domestic violence, as violence between two people, but constantly negging another person, constantly greeting them with negative words all the time and belittling them and telling them that they can't do a thing, etc. We don't tend to read that as violence because in the moment, it's not as violent as a punch to the face, but the cumulative
Oh,
effect
insidious. Yeah. And
is,
yet, someone on the outside looking in might recognize that as maybe they wouldn't call it violence, but they would recognize it as wrong and
true.
horrible, and you need to get away from that person.
Yeah, and that's why communities are important because some people can see these things a lot better than other people. For example, I can't see certain things because I need them explained to me, very detailed, and I don't pick up on when, like, a very mundane example, when I was just starting university, I was at the age where lots of my peers were flirting with me and I could not tell.
You only learned about it because your friends told you about it.
It was sort of an afterwards sort of thing. So I needed those people to point something out to me in the same way that doing violence, you might not even know that you are experiencing a form of violence until someone points it out to you and you are able to.
You mean like your cat?
Pardon me?
You mean like
Yes.
your cat?
Yeah, very he is having violence done to him by the fact that I am not directly looking at him and petting him.
But okay, to pull this back to Solarpunk then and
Right, yes.
changing cultural norms, how can Solarpunk start pulling levers, not just within its own movement? Because I think Solarpunk tries very hard to police itself and maintain a very rigid set of cultural norms, but across a broader swath of society.
Well, I think what's really nice about Solarpunk is the fact that it is sort of applicable to a lot of people. Pretty much everybody can be a Solarpunk, you can pick it up and there are people at every stage in the movement, basically. And they can bring that with them into whatever walk of life that they have. So, yeah, the future is unevenly distributed and we all live in different cultures. But if we all agree on Solarpunk values and are part of a Solarpunk community, we can maybe, when we go away from that Solarpunk community, we can bring a bit of that with us into wherever we are.
Right.
Or that,
Okay. So we can, we're at the bottom up end, and until
yeah.
we've got Solarpunk, I don't know, like government executives.
I don't think if we had Solarpunk government executives, our government would look very, very different. Like I'm definitely in the camp that like society needs to be organized by some people, like, but I don't think any sort of Solarpunk system is going to look like what we have now. So if we had Solarpunk government officials, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure they'd be nudging people to do the right thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I
anyways, okay, so we're at the bottom. We're working bottom up. So what do we have to do aside from, have community gardens and have little podcasts where we talk about Solarpunk and write Solarpunk stories. I mean, I guess these are ways in which we're all not just trying to imagine the future, but to change cultural norms for the better.
I think that's definitely where, art comes into it. Like you mentioned, stories and, well, these podcasts, but then also, visual.
Oh, are we a work of art? Oh, that's awesome.
I mean, technically, if you go down to the base of the term, whatever. Anyways, Yeah, just I mean, I'm thinking of that Solarpunk art installation that John Threat was talking about.
Yeah, that as we're recording, it hasn't ended yet.
Yeah,
But by
yeah.
the time this comes out, it'll be over and you will have totally missed it.
Hopefully that changes the minds of some of the people in the culture that is, the arts scene in CalArts, and or encourages them.
Or in Los Angeles. Or, most people haven't heard of Solarpunk. So, I mean, it opens doors just by letting people know it exists and that it has these particular certain goals and values and, look, this is cool. And there's this tech and there's this music and there's this social agenda. And here are these radical people giving, and not just radical in the 1980s sense of the word, like, oh, dude, that's a radical person. But
Although I
radical
really
thinkers
want it
giving
to be radical in the 1980 sense, yes.
um, yeah, giving speeches and doing all sorts of cool stuff that I missed because I'm in Germany right now and not in Los Angeles.
Hey, there's a lot of really cool stuff going on in Europe right now. So, in terms of, environmental events and art, I'm
Oh,
getting
there
tired.
there are solar punk collectives in Berlin
Yeah,
and
and
I'm in France and yeah, in Italy and probably in Spain as well. So it's interesting because I realize I've never met a solar punk in real life. I think I might have said this on one of the more previous recent podcasts. I haven't even met you in real life.
yeah, I know. When is that going to
Yeah, I
happen?
don't know. I've never been to Canada.
Yeah, well, I've never been to Germany, so
Yeah, Canada's bigger though, and it's closer to. I mean, I've been very close to Canada. I've
But yeah, I think that solar punk's sort of like role, I think, in cultural change is not so much like dictating from a top-down structure. That is not at all what we want to do. That's kind of against solar punk ideals, I would say.
Mhm.
But instead, sort of opening up that space for a more positive imagination of the future and saying, look, here are not just one alternative, but many different positive alternatives to the cultures, plural, that you currently live in, and the ways, plural, that you currently live. And there are, I don't want to say like an escape hatch for capitalism, but like,
Oh, that
or
sounds cute though.
an escape hatch for the
Do we get to
dystopia.
wear a parachute too?
Like there is, like there are little nuggets of a solar punk future poking through this dystopian present right now, and being able to change people's perspectives so that they feel empowered to be able to create that future even despite the current conditions of the present. So whether that's, like picking up litter or giving a speech to a lot of different academics about, like brighter futures, or if it's, like bringing it into your work as, say, a biogeochemist and looking to, save, I don't know, what do biogeochemists do? I was about to say, like save sea life, but
Oh no, no, not at all. Not at all. Biogeochemists, they understand how elements like carbon or silicon or phosphorus or whatever cycle through the various reservoirs in the Earth system.
oh, see, that's really, really important. And that is the kind of knowledge that needs to be shared a bit more, I think, with people. So maybe bring in sort of a way to communicate that with non-academics, or to communicate that with scientists, and communicate that in a, I don't want to say political way, but like not a neutral way, not a like, here is this information, but a, here is this information that we can use to be able to bring about a less climate changed future, or to mitigate
Ugh.
the
Yeah,
climate.
it's interesting. Information. You do need sometimes information to get you to the point where you think you should start changing norms or to get people to think, I'm thinking about this wrong or I'm going about this all wrong. But the scientists, I'm not sure have had that much luck changing our norms about climate change. And they've been, whatever, have been trying since the 80s
Oh
really
yeah,
hard, but
interference though. It's like I can talk from the Canadian example. Back in back in the earlier decade of this century, the current prime minister at the time muzzled scientists so that they couldn't actually communicate their data. They were not allowed to by law.
Wow,
I believe
why even fund science if
libraries were burned. Well, not burned, but like, we're just
was this
silent.
that Ford guy? No, who was this?
No, this was Stephen Harper.
No, yeah, okay, we don't want to go down this
Yeah,
road here. So,
so it's on my mind. Yesterday, there were a whole bunch of anti-trans protests in all across Ontario.
well, so this is okay, so this is a weird
Against the
thing.
trans agenda and trans ideology.
This
So,
is weird. So here, so I mean, okay, society has undergone some revolutionary change in our thinking of these LGBTQ issues within
mhm,
the last 30 years. And it's clear that there's a segment of society that is going into meltdown about this because
mhm,
this is revolutionary, right? I
mhm,
mean, it shouldn't be, right? Treating people like human beings should not be revolutionary, but somehow it is. A friend of mine said, this is messy and it's ugly and there's tension and protests and because this is a revolution
mhm,
and we should see it that way. This is a revolution in the changing of our norms in society. Not long ago it was illegal to be gay, and
mhm.
now we have gay marriage, this kind of thing, and it's and there's lots of trans people suddenly everywhere. People who didn't even know they were trans or that it was possible to be trans are like, oh my God, I'm trans. And I'll tell you that because I have the freedom to do that now and it's safe to do that now. Okay. And so now you have all these people who are like,
There's no
no,
language to do that.
no.
Like when I was growing up, there just wasn't language around it. And so it's so great that kids these days have the language around it. And I was reading a post the other day, that sort of speaks a little bit to what we were talking about earlier with the sort of interpersonal cultural change, how you were saying that, or well, how it's a fact basically that, people don't think that, well, most people don't think that gay men are, crimes against God or whatever it is, like there's not such pervasive homophobia because people tend to have this interpersonal relationship with people who are gay and people who have felt comfortable coming out to them. And so there's this pervasiveness in society. However, with the AIDS epidemic that happened, that killed off a massive swath of people who identified as LGBTQ. And unfortunately, there have been a lot of calls in the trans community, or a lot of questioning rather, of, where are the trans elders? Where are our gay elders? It's like, well, actually, the government deliberately let them die because of the AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
A lot of the trans elders, a lot of the people who perhaps could have been part of that slower sort of like transformation of like interpersonal acceptance of trans people because they
Mm-hmm.
felt it was okay to come out as trans, just weren't there. And so now all of a sudden it seems like there's tons of like these like trans people coming out of nowhere. Well, they're not coming out of nowhere, but we're also
No, I
losing.
think there was a watershed, but as well, that some threshold that got crossed where people also felt safe enough to actually be public about themselves.
Yeah, and I mean,
Also,
coming
can I? Mhm.
where we try to like instill these I guess quote unquote liberal values in our kids and like raise the next generation to be better than their elders. Well, they are better than the elders, like acceptance and knowing who they are, and the elders are like, no, not like that.
They're better than their elders, except for the ones watching the Andrew Tate videos. But anyways,
Oh yeah.
so solar punks gotta go out, work on changing everybody's cultural norms here for the better.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, like it circles back to what we were talking about in honestly our first ever episode of Solarpunk's,
Oh
you
God,
know,
I have no idea. I don't remember. What did we talk about?
we talked about manifestos and whether
Oh
Solarpunk
yeah.
do
Yeah, yeah.
something
Okay.
or couldn't do something. And so, I don't think Solarpunks should feel obligated to,
Knock on
bring.
doors like missionaries.
Yeah, no, I
Can
mean,
I talk to you today about Solarpunk?
you have to save a certain number of souls to, be part of the Solarpunk club. That's not how it works. I mean, like being a Solarpunk and holding Solarpunk values, that can just be like, you might just be living your life the way that you feel is best and that best aligns with your Solarpunk values. And even that just inspires people
Ah,
to,
it helps normalize it.
yeah, exactly. It helps normalize it just by being who you are. It helps normalize
The things that you value.
ability and acceptance of others and compassion and kindness and all of these things that we as solar punks want to enact into the culture. It's not a matter of being a solar punk evangelist and saying you need to do this to be a solar punk, or you need to act this certain way to be a solar punk. I think it's a very much embodied experience of being a solar punk. If you hold these solar punk values, you're necessarily going to act in accordance with them, and that is going to change how you interact with the world. It's just going to happen naturally. I don't think people need to put pressure on themselves to be a solar punk in terms of cultural change. So
yeah, but it's interesting how one of this core, I'm not quite sure what the right word is, not tenet, but aspect. One of the core aspects of solarpunk is writing fiction, right? With this fiction where you help bring about the future by visualizing the future that you want that you think would be really cool to live in. And yet, right, here's a way that solarpunk doesn't even realize it's working on changing cultural norms. Yeah. But that is exactly what that action is aiming to do.
Yeah. I think like the most important, I guess, cultural work of solarpunk is to expand that imagination of what is possible and visualize those sustainable futures. And
and ultimately to have a canon.
Yeah. Well,
like a core set of solarpunk stories, maybe, or
Canadian literature. I want to be very careful to say that maybe we shouldn't be canonizing things. It's helpful to have a core list of inspirational solarpunk works, but if you deliberately create a canon, suddenly people begin to have that feeling of, like, I have to write with these themes only in order to be included in this solarpunk canon. I cannot go outside of what has already been established within this solarpunk canon.
Oh, yeah, but wouldn't you say there are people who will be like, oh, but that's not solarpunk already?
Yeah, yes, yeah. So I think, like the idea of a canon should always be contested. I think it's handy to have like a certain amount of solarpunk fiction materials that you would send to someone who said, hey, I've just learned about solarpunk and I'd love to read more. Can you recommend some books to me? But recommend the books that you like. Don't recommend them because you think they're the best like example of solarpunk, but you don't necessarily like the stories,
And yet, isn't there sort of already on some level a bit of a solarpunk canon?
I think there is, just by way of how time works and how, like how scarce it is that we have a lot of aggregated published solarpunk works. So say short story collections and stuff like that. It's they're easier to find sort of disparately online, but putting them together into some sort of traditionally published format is more difficult.
I think I also meant the nonfiction stuff, the videos, the Tumblr posts, the manifestos.
What's nice about Tumblr is that it's fairly ephemeral. So sometimes there are Tumblr posts that are evergreen and you can come back to, but often
or legendary.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. A vintage, one might say. Yeah, I think it's incumbent on solarpunks to always be thinking about how to challenge that or how to expand on it,
What else can we stuff into the carrier bag?
Yeah, or like how is this story like an inspiration for, or like a first step on the ladder, and now you can build the second step. And so, like, it's not that, like once you build the second step, then that first step doesn't matter anymore and it goes away. You're still going to need that first step to support. But also saying that some solarpunk fiction was written pre-Me Too movement.
Well, yeah, right? So sometimes things do feel kind of obsolete because the norms have changed.
But I mean, there are also some things in some solarpunk stories where the norms have changed that are obsolete feeling, but then, maybe they envision a really cool setting. And that's something that still is green.
Relevant. And that brings us to the end of season 3. Woo! Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you'll come join us for season 4. And in the meantime, by the time you're hearing this, it's about 99% certain that our brand new website is up. We've had it totally redesigned. It's so much better now. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Same old address, brand new look. So check it out.
Thank you for listening to Solarpunk Presents,
a podcast hosted and produced by Ariel Kroon and Christina De La Rocha.
The audio for this episode was recorded in part on the traditional territory of the neutral Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples.
And in Germany. The opening and closing music for this podcast is Water Cooler Gang by Monkey Warhol, available for use under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License.
If you like what we do and want to support the podcast,
join our Patreon at www.patreon.com/solarpunkpresents.
Or share the podcast with friends, family, and people you know who might be interested in our guests and what we have to say. We'd also love it if you could write us a nice review on your podcatcher of choice, because every review bumps us higher in the algorithm's priority, so we can reach more listeners.
Until the next episode,
keep dreaming and keep up the good work.